Now let me get this straight. I believe it was me that told every last one of you that there wouldn't be much more evidence than what was in the PCA. And every last YouTuber, every last one of you said, no, JB, they got so much more that you don't know about. And I said, listen, you inexperienced sack of shit. If you've never been arrested, you've never been through the process, you don't understand that the majority of their case is going to be in the PCA. And come to find out, here we are just a few months later, and they have no more. There's nothing tying Brian Kohberger to the victims. There is nothing more than the evidence, than the DNA on a sheath that they're not even going to use anyway. Interesting, huh? Guys, I'm JB Gunner. This is Crime Time. Let me talk to you. Let's go ahead and get into this because it's time to free Brian Kohberger. Give him a bond, something. Because the reality is starting to set in. And that's that I've been right the whole time. Many of you have been right the whole time. Let's get into it. Let's do it.
Bring it back.
And now you guys can feel better. You guys ain't got to be so bored with all the other fucking true crimers. And not all of them are boring. Shout out to Harsh and shout out to a few of them. You guys have asked for my comments on these court documents that have been released over the weekend, and now it's Monday, now you got it. And just to be perfectly honest, I know some of you are upset because you want me to come here on the weekends and do it. Man, you can suck my balls. I ain't doing shit on the weekends but drinking, but having a good time. I'm sorry. The rest of these people can work on the weekends. Y'all don't pay me enough to work on the weekends. Just being dead honest. Let's go ahead and get into this, though, guys. Before we do, I want to say first and foremost, thank you to everybody that does support the channel, any of my channels, regardless of the method you choose, whether it's Cash App, Patreon, Venmo, PayPal. Truth is, guys, I couldn't do this each and every day as often as I do if it wasn't for you, the Gun Squad. Big shout out to you guys. Love you so much. With that being said, if you too find my content valuable, feel free to hit the links down below. Support the channel. Join the Gun Squad today. And if you're not a snowflake, maybe you can go check out some of my other channels, my live stream channel, my politics channel. But look, man, you got to be a special breed of motherfucker to go over to those channels. This is kind of the baby walking channel. This is where, you know what I'm saying. I'm actually very, very censored, I guess you could say, over here. I know that sounds crazy, but yeah, everything else is pretty much wild. But hell, I even got a gaming channel if y'all want to check it out. Let's go ahead and get into this, though, because what we're going to be talking about today is the court documents that was released over the weekend that y'all kept begging me to talk about. And I don't blame you, because only a few of us, myself, Harsh, Jules of all trade, Sleuthy Goosey. Only a few of us have kind of went by the whole innocent until proven guilty mantra. Now everybody else is starting to jump back on it. You see little JLR, you see drunk turkeys, you see everybody jumping back on. Hell, I think even Gray Hughes did a video talking about the possibility of Brian Kohberger's innocence. Excuse me. I've been leading the charge of Brian Kohberger's innocence this entire time. I've got over 150 videos on this story on the Idaho 4, and only once, and that was when it came to a Google search trend, did I even consider the fact that Brian Kohberger might have actually been guilty. Now, I've been open to it. I've been listening, and I've told you motherfuckers, show me the evidence. Show me the money. And all of you have been like, they got so much more, JB, you don't know about. Well, we're going to find out today that them and you are completely fucking wrong. And I and others that thought like me was right the entire time. So if you're one of those people, shout out to y'all. Shout out to everybody out there in the Gun Squad that also gave Brian Kohberger the benefit of the doubt like an American constitutionalist should. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this because we're going to start off with the home run. We're going to start off with the big boy. Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a motion that was filed, and it is the second judicial, it is objection to the state's motion for protective order. Comes now, Brian C. Kohberger, by and through his attorney Jay Logston, Chief Deputy Litigation, and hereby objects to the state's motion for protective order filed June 16, 2023, on the grounds that the material the state seeks to hide is discoverable and must be provided to Mr. Kohberger. The problem is the state is still trying to hide evidence. That's what they're doing here. But I'm going to show you. We're going to continue on with this because this entire thing is a bombshell. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the factual background. On November 13th, 2022, law enforcement responding to a 911 call found the 4 people deceased. Law enforcement later found a K-bar knife sheath placed next to Miss Mogan on her bed. Placed. Look at. I want you to just pay attention to some of the verbiage that you see here. Placed next to Miss Mogan on the bed. The sheath was placed button side down and partially under Mrs. Mogan and the comforter. On November 20th, 2022, the Idaho State Police Lab in Meridian, Idaho, located DNA on the button of the sheath and performed STR analysis that led nowhere when ran through CODIS, and other than to show the provider was a male. By December 17, 2022, lab analysts were aware of 2 additional males' DNA. What the fuck does that say? We're aware of 2 additional males' DNA within the house where the deceased were located, and another unknown male DNA on a glove found outside the residence on November 20th, 2022. Now, everybody's automatically assuming it's the glove that one YouTuber found, and it very well could be. It very well could be. That's definitely possible. But what were the other 2 DNAs, and why are we just now hearing about this? Remember when this all first started, we all said, man, there's going to be all kinds of dudes' DNAs around there. And we're finding out that in the location where the people were killed, where they were found, there was 2 other male DNAs. How come we have never heard that? And by the way, how come they're not releasing those DNAs, the evidence that evidence to Brian Kohberger? Why does Brian Kohberger not get to see the evidence of the other 2 males' DNAs that's in the fucking house? So let's go ahead and roll. Let's see. To this date, the defense is unaware of what sort of testing, if any, was conducted on these samples other than STR DNA profiles. Further, these 3 separate and distinct male DNA profiles were not identified through CODIS, leading to the conclusion that the profiles do not belong to Mr. Kohberger. So there's 3 other male DNAs besides Brian Kohberger at the crime scene. Release this man, will you please? Release this man. Let's go ahead and continue on. Look, granted, a million dudes could been in there. But if we're talking about Maddie Mogan's bedroom, if that's where they're talking about, because I don't know if that's where they're talking about or I don't know where they're talking about. But it says in the location where the deceased were at. That could mean the home, that could mean whatever. But they have 3 other unidentified male DNAs. Interesting. While this was ongoing, police were investigating many various possible suspects. How come we didn't know about that? Police were investigating many other possible suspects. Many of them provided DNA, but there was one motherfucker that didn't want to provide DNA. At least one had his DNA secretly, whatever that word is, but it means secretly, taken from a discarded cigarette butt. Many have had their phones taken and downloaded. How come we didn't know about any of this other shit? And who's the guy that refused to give the DNA? Shouldn't we be looking a little bit harder at the guy that refused to fucking give the DNA of the cigarette butt at the fucking house? Or whatever the fuck it is? One area of the investigation had to do with a white sedan seen on camera located at King Road, first glimpsed by officers on November 18, 2022. By November 25th, 2022, police believed the car to be a white Elantra and asked for law enforcement to be on the lookout for one. Precisely how the police came to believe the car was an Elantra is still unknown. They don't even know that. A report from an analysis from the FBI dated March 21st shows the analysts heavily relying on a video, and we all know what the video is, the gas station video, of a car headed in the wrong direction at the wrong time on Ridge Road. Remember me telling y'all that? And y'all said I was wrong? I told you that car was headed in the wrong direction at the wrong time. It was going the opposite direction of the fucking house. I've been saying that about that little video, the little fucking still photo of this Elantra. Man, the defense is poking all the holes in this case I told you they would poke, because these are the holes that's in the case. Let's continue. The state's latest filing admits that somewhere within all of this, they engaged in investigative genetic genealogy, using the DNA taken from the button on the sheath, and now claims that it was due to the use of this technique that it tipped local law enforcement to investigate Mr. Kohberger. It remains unclear what the police first relied on in focusing their investigation on Mr. Kohberger. Beautiful statement. No matter what came first, the car or the genetic genealogy, the investigation has provided precious little. There is no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. Look at that. Woo! No connection. No messages in the social media. No connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. They didn't know each other. Brian Kohberger was not jumping in their DMs, just like I told you he wasn't. They did not know each other. There's absolutely no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. Check this. There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, office, home, and/or vehicle. Bam! That means the hairs and the bloods that was in Kohberger's apartment, that wasn't theirs. Not a drop of their DNA in Brian Kohberger's car, in his apartment, in his parents' house, on his clothes, in his asshole. Not a fucking drop of DNA from the victims anywhere in anything that Brian Kohberger's got. Shall we continue? Shall we summarize a little bit? So, there's multiple dudes' DNAs at the crime scene. We didn't know that. Multiple dudes, right? There's absolutely no connection between Brian Kohberger and the victims. None. Not a single fucking friend request, nothing. None. They have no DNA in Brian Kohberger's car, house, apartment, anything belonging to any of the victims. Remember when remember we also found out that the IDs that didn't belong to them either. We found that out in the Dateline shit, remember? Ain't this a little strange? Because wasn't you guys the one flipping out? Oh, there was a dog hair. There was a hair in Brian Kohberger's shower. Well, there's blood, which probably is just from cutting himself shaving or a pimple or something. There's blood. There's blood inside Brian Kohberger's house on his pillow. I told you, there would be nothing. Remember when I said that? JB, there's going to be all kinds of stuff you don't know about. Oh, is there? Do you see it? Because it looks to me that they have absolutely nothing that was not in the PCA. It looks to me like 100% of their case was in the PCA. Not even 85%. 100%. They have absolutely nothing else, and they're not even going to use the goddamn the knife sheath genetic testing shit, which was the whole basis of the arrest that got Brian Kohberger to begin with. Whew, feels good, don't it? Feels good. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Let's get back to the document. So there's none of that. In essence, through the lack of disclosure and their motion to protect the genetic genealogy investigation, the state is hiding its entire case. Yes, it is, because there is none. Now, what's the argument? The state apparently thinks they do not need to explain how they came to think that it was Mr. Kohberger's DNA on the sheath. Yes, they're hiding that. They're like, fuck it, we ain't got to tell you. Presumably, the defense is expected to accept at face value that the sheath had touched DNA, just waiting for testing by all the FBI's myriad resources. Additionally, the defense is to guess whether the state focuses investigation on Mr. Kohberger via a bizarrely complex DNA tree experiment or through its faulty identification of the vehicle involved in this case. Oh! It wasn't the vehicle! Let's try it again. Oh! Or through its faulty identification of the vehicle involved in this case. Oh, that's nice, ain't it? Beautiful shit. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, Mr. Kohberger, by the way, Ann Taylor would not put this in a court document if it wasn't true. Do you understand what I'm saying? If the DNA thing wasn't true, she couldn't put it in this document. She would be she could be purging herself. Do you understand what I'm saying? If any of these statements were not true, it would not be in this document. Because it is under all of these court documents are under the penalty of perjury. You can't lie in this shit. So when they talked about the DNA, the no connections, any of this, you can take this shit to the bank. This is official court documentation. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Mr. Kohberger does not accept that his defense does not need this information. Exactly. It rather obviously falls within the ambit of Rule 16, and the fact of the state's briefing makes clear in its kitchen sink approach to their briefing. Woo! The state begins their argument claiming Rule 16 has no interest in IgG testing, and then ends their argument claiming that somehow people will stop sharing their genetics if they were to realize the government is watching. Both arguments must fail. To begin with, the state apparently only wants to prevent Mr. Kohberger from seeing how the IgG profile was created. They're going to get the fucking IgG profile thrown out. You see that, right? And how many other people the FBI chose to ignore during their investigation. We know of at least 3. In essence, the state argues that if the later STR testing is accurate, then there is no reason to concern ourselves with how the state came to investigate Mr. Kohberger. State's brief at 9. What the state's argument asked this court and Mr. Kohberger to assume is that the DNA on the sheets was placed there by Mr. Kohberger and not someone else during an investigation. Oh, they are literally, listen. What the state's argument asked the court and Mr. Kohberger to assume is that the DNA on the sheath was placed there by Mr. Kohberger and not someone else during an investigation that spans hundreds of members of law enforcement. And apparently at least one lab the state refuses to name. Jesus Christ. That's Ann Taylor flat out saying, hey, we don't know if these motherfuckers planted. We're to assume these motherfuckers didn't plant it? Shut up, dog. Shut up. I know I'm excited to. God damn it, dog. Don't do it. All right, I had to shut the little fucker up. Anyways, give him treats. All right, so let's get back to this. All right, so they're flat out saying that it's to assume that nobody planted the sheath. That's what you're expecting them to do. So they're hinting that that's something that could have occurred. Perhaps most puzzling is the state's argument that while Rule 16 requires them to turn over results or reports from scientific investigations, it does not require the state to disclose what law enforcement does with the results or reports. State's brief of 14. First of all, that sounds like an admission that the information as to how the IgG was carried out should be disclosed. Second, what law enforcement does with results or reports is covered by Rule 16. Frankly, the fact that the members of the FBI are so concerned about permitting Mr. Kohberger to know what they were up to with what was supposedly his DNA does not give one the impression that there is nothing to see here, as the state seems to imply. Thank you, Ann Taylor. You are the shit. You are the shit. Finally, the state's claim that ICR 16 applies to this matter is quite bizarre. Presumably, the independent company that the government relied on was paid for its work and would stand by it in court. The state provides no real argument as to why the company needs to be protected. Mr. Kohberger is left to suspect that they wish to keep their methods from being questioned. That's exactly what it is. To the extent that there is some concern about intellectual property that can be addressed via a protective order that permits Mr. Kohberger and his defense team to review the work. Do you see how they're trying to railroad Kohberger? They're trying to prevent the defense from being able to review the goddamn DNA work. Second, the state appears to argue that everyone living on Earth that provides genetic information is A, unaware that their DNA could be used by government somewhere for something, and B is an informant within the meaning of the term in the rule. The state citations to cases involving actual informants hardly help make it an incredible leap. No court has ever found the existence of a DNA informant. There you go. It would appear that the state is acknowledging that the companies are providing personal information to the state and that those companies and the government would suffer if the public were to realize it. That's right. The only two databases that allow access are the ones that already inform their users, and those users can opt in to allow law enforcement searches. The statement by the government implies that the databases searched may be ones that the law enforcement is specifically barred from, which would mean it's illegal. It would mean you have to throw it out. Let's read that again. The statement by the government implies that the databases searched may be ones that law enforcement is specifically barred from, which explains why they do not want to disclose their methods. Whoa. Throw this motherfucker out. You know what's fucked up is the real killer's still running around. The real killer is still running around. If the facts that the government is looking at the genetic information that people are sharing was at all an issue, then the state's very public acknowledgement of such investigations was clearly a big mistake. Clearly. In any case, it is hard to understand why Mr. Kohberger should be the one to suffer because these companies in our government chose to mislead or not educate the public. Ooh. According to the Pew Research Center in February 2020, 48% of respondents thought it was acceptable to give their DNA to law enforcement to solve crime. 33% said no, and 18% were unsure. The citizens, however, 60% thought that their information could not be shared with other companies. There is no federal law about the sharing of genetic information, but multiple states have begun regulating police use. That's crazy. Mr. Kohberger has reasons to be extremely suspicious of the IgG used in this case. Rather than seeing it as some sort of complex tree building that led to him, it appears far more like a lineup where the government was already aware of who they wanted to target. Set up! Rather than they have the investigation done by someone blind to that fact, the FBI chose to do it themselves. This is akin to the police pulling in Mr. Kohberger and 5 of his cousins off the street and then pointing at him. The only authority that the state has in its favor that is on point is a trial court order from a California case that settled before it could lead anywhere. The decision relied on People versus Johnson. The court in Johnson was not deciding whether a defendant had the right to know how he was identified, only that his identification could come in a trial without a mini trial about it. A better case on the issue is State versus Ortega. In this case, an appellate court heard similar arguments about the need for software used for facial recognition to be discovered to the defendant, though they would not be admitted at trial. The court considered the matter and found, "We are keenly aware that the cases we have discussed involve instances concerning prior hearings and potential expert testimony, and that here we are dealing instead with eyewitnesses who have already identified the perpetrator, and the identification found admissible under weight. However, the facts of this case convince us defendant will be deprived of due process if he does not have access to the raw materials integral to the building of an effective defense." Exactly. The evidence sought here is directly tied to the defense's ability to test the reliability of the FRT. As such, it is vital to impeach the witness's identification, challenge the state's investigation, create reasonable doubt, and demonstrate third-party guilt. Mr. Kohberger finds himself in a similar position as Mr. Ortega. A massive investigation came to focus on him and him alone, oddly, even though there was 3 DNAs. The state appears to be trying to hide its original domino, such as that he cannot discover why. Mr. Kohberger has a right to discover and question the investigation that led to him. The court should so find. That was the most powerful document in this entire case. You can't tell me it wasn't. And there was a lot of other documents that was filed, and I'll just give you the basis. Declaration of Ann C. Taylor in support of defendant's third motion to compel. Basically, they still need the fucking evidence. Now check this shit out, what they're asking for. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger filed a specific request for discovery related to DNA in the case. Request 3 profiles uploaded to the DNA database. He wants to know who else's DNA was found there. He wants to know who, and they're not giving him the information. The state still has not provided all emails, text messages, electronic messages, or other messages regarding to the biological testing in this investigation. Unexpected results and corrective actions. They're still not doing that. They're still trying to hide the genealogy, whatever testing. A lot of this, for some reason, the government is so, for some reason, the state and the prosecution is so tight-lipped. They're keeping all that DNA shit to themselves. There's something going on with that DNA. And we've known it since the start. Now, of course, they're compelling for more discovery. Of course, a third motion to compel discovery that was also filed. They have, by the way, denying Shannon Gray's motion request to be exempt from the gag order. The gag order stays in place for all of them. The gag order remains. And then finally, motion to file defense counsel's first sworn statement. So there's some new lawyers in the case as well. But they're filing because there's going to be a first sworn statement coming from Ann Taylor sometime this week. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality here is they have nothing on Brian Kohberger. That PCA was all they had. And they're not even going to potentially use the knife sheath. Well, but JB, they got all kinds of stuff you don't know about, really? Well, apparently the courts and the defense doesn't know about it either. So they're just keeping all of it from everybody, huh? Which you can't do. That's the point of discovery. Sounds to me like Mr. Kohberger needs to be released. No connection to any of the victims. No IDs. None of their DNA anywhere in anything of his. There's 3 other dudes' DNA at the murder scene. Bruh, it's time to release Brian Kohberger. It's time to let that man go. Let me know in the comment section. Do you agree? This was the most impactful. This was the most impactful document we've seen in this whole case. I'm thejbgunner. This is crime time. Victory is ours. It's coming. You know that, right? Dismiss the charges and go find the real killer. If my content is valuable to you, you like what I do here, feel free to support the channel with the links down below. I was going to release this on Monday. It's Sunday at 5:12. I think I'll go ahead and release it tonight. Hope you guys enjoy it. That means I may not have a video tomorrow. I may, but anyway, I'll go ahead and release this for you guys early. Let me know in the comment section what you think. I'm thejbgunner. Y'all have a good night. Free that man. Free that man.